Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and you can find this show here at American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com, as well as on my website, which is PorkinsPolicyReview.com. And if you are new to the show, you can always follow the show through RSS feed, through email blast. You can always follow on YouTube, as well as iTunes. And I guess I don't mention this enough, but because I assume everybody knows. But you can also, of course, follow me on Twitter at Porkins Policy. Well, we've got a very big show for you today, jam-packed, lots of information, really a good guest, someone that I'm excited to have on. But very briefly, because I don't want to take up too much time, I just want to thank John for recently becoming a subscriber on Patreon. So thank you so much, John. Of course, you can support my work by going to patreon.com/Pierce Redmond. You can become a subscriber at the low introductory price of $1 a month, and that helps me out tremendously. So thank you to all of the Patreon subscribers out there. I will be putting out a new subscriber podcast, hopefully by the end of this week or sometime early next week. I've already got the episode planned out, so I'm not just talking out of my ass with this one about getting it up. And also, very briefly, well, two things. One, of course, last week I was talking about AFR. We were in need of some financial help, and it looks like we've been able to get that all sorted out. But again, we are trying to expand the website and the platform. We've got some very exciting new hosts that are going to be coming on that I'm sure you'll be hearing more about later on in the week. So if you can help support AFR, then please do so. And you can, of course, go to AFR's Patreon and their PayPal, and you can make a donation there. And very quickly, I know I sound like a bit of a broken record, but I still have a bunch of copies of the American Journal of Economics and Sociology that I need to send out. And I am still missing a few people's addresses. So Kyle and Jake, if you can send me your address so I can send you the journal, and we'll get that all sorted. And I basically just a few more to send out, which I just realized I hadn't sent. They were sort of like stuck at the end of my bed. So I just discovered them last night while I was cleaning up. So I will be sending, I'll be sending out the ones that I do have addresses for, but I still need a few more addresses. So please contact me if you are listening to this. But today, my guest is Keelan Balderson, who runs the website wideshut.co.uk. I hope that many of you out there are familiar with Keelan's work. Keelan has done a lot of stuff with a good friend of the show, Tom Secker, and Keelan's work focuses on everything from the 7/7 London bombings, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, the satanic panic, media hoaxes, things like Hampstead and Holly Grieg, some really excellent stuff that Keelan has done on that. And as the tagline to wideshut.co.uk says, behind the media's mask. So a lot about the way that media covers certain events and things of that nature. And today, Keelan is joining me because we are going to be discussing the Manchester bombing as well as the recent London attacks. But Keelan Balderson, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
Hello, yeah, it's good to be here. I'm quite a fan of the show. I wish I was as consistent as you, to be honest. I seem to do a return show of my podcast like once a year, and then it never actually returns. So.
Well, maybe this will be the encouragement to get out there and do more stuff. But I mean, we're all bad with that, so no worries there. And of course, I've been a big fan of your work since I first got into this whole alt media spectrum, and I was introduced to your work very early on in my waking up time or whatever, of course through Tom Secker's stuff. But Keelan, you've been following the recent attacks in Manchester as well as in London. You've written several great pieces, which we'll, of course, link up to in the show notes on Manchester and what's been going on. So obviously, right now the focus has sort of shifted to London, and I think we'll talk about why that is. But let's go back a little bit to the Manchester bombing. So for anybody that's been living under a rock or hasn't had access to the internet, on May 22nd, a suicide bomber detonated a bomb inside the Manchester Arena at the end of an Ariana Grande concert, killing 23 and injuring 119 people. And Keelan, you were actually telling me just before we went on that you traveled to Manchester like a day after the bombing. So give us your kind of initial perspective. What was it like as someone that lives in England? What was going on when this happened?
Well, fortunately, I don't live near Manchester or London for that matter, but I was actually on holiday in Greece on a big family holiday, and I first heard about this basically the morning after it happened through social media and whatnot, and I was just glued to my phone for the rest of that day, just checking all the info as it came out. But we did actually fly back through Manchester Airport. It would have been, I think, a day and a bit after the bombing. And I did see, a few kind of people with, handheld bomb detector devices and things like that. There was a little bit of ramping up of security, but in general, it was just business as usual. But it's when I got home and started to gather all the RSS feeds and database all the articles and stuff and corresponded a bit with Tom Secker, that I began to see some parallels with 7/7. And it quickly kind of became clear to me that there's a lot more going on with Manchester than perhaps the security state would really want us to know about, really.
Well, certainly, that's a bit of an understatement, maybe. And I was really struck at first at how fast and sort of lazy the initial media coverage was. We're presented with this lone bomber named Salman Abedi. He's described in the media as a Libyan refugee, and we'll get to his family's refugee status. There's like almost no questions. He's a lone bomber. This is the guy. For whatever reason, it's U.S. intelligence that actually reveals the identity of this person, not MI6 or the Prime Minister's office or anything like that. And that's just sort of it. That's just kind of the story. Lone guy, here's his name, he did it, that's it. And the media kind of just went along with this, no questions asked. And of course that he was, we never saw him coming, wasn't on our radar. Then a few days later, we start to get all of the usual talking points. Well, it turns out that, he was under surveillance by MI5, but they didn't think he was a threat. Then we find out that his parents were worried, his friends were worried, his brother thought he was a terrorist. And this sort of narrative that we've heard over and over again, begins to kind of, present itself. And Keelan, as you were just saying, there's a lot of parallels between what happened in Manchester and 7/7. So why don't you kind of, elaborate a little bit on that? Because in the environment that we live in, the mainstream media, God forbid they ever, question these things or point out even just some of the obvious parallels, between what happened in Manchester and 7/7, like, the idea that this guy was on their radar. But we don't even really see the so-called alternative media anymore focusing on these things. Instead, they've just either fallen into its blowback, which makes no sense, or he's Muslim, therefore, of course he did this, he hates our freedoms. So, for the listeners out there and everybody, tell us a little bit, how is this similar to 7/7, and particularly the way in which the media narrative has sort of rolled out since then?
Well, one of the prime things is that, like you said, we've got all this information that has now kind of come out that bomber Abedi was on their radar. And we had a very similar thing with 7/7. Initially, they're like, oh no, they're clean skins. We've never heard of them before.
Right.
And then, you know, gradually as time goes on, more comes out. They drag their heels. They kind of investigate themselves, which is also what they're doing now with the Manchester bomber. They've launched some internal inquiries to see what they knew. I mean, surely they know what they knew. And if they didn't, then why didn't they know? But something that has interested me, and one of the parallels with 7/7, is that they've released this number, this 20,000 number. Well, in some reports it's 3,000, but the claim is that there are 20,000 jihadis in the UK, and this is why Abedi slipped through the net. Because MI5 simply doesn't have the resources to track all these would-be terrorists. And that plays right into the right-wing narrative, really, that Islam is taking over Europe and we're not doing enough and there's all these jihadis. And it also kind of plays into the narrative that the security state needs more funding and power to tackle all these extremists that are just running free out there. But of course, that ignores the fact that Abedi seems to have been part of a very specific Libyan cell. He traveled to Libya several times, to and from Libya several times, with what seems like MI5's blessing. And then you have this FBI thing that MI5 was tipped off about him in the months prior to the attacks. And that amounts to a lot more than, oh, he's just one of the many random Muslims that have extremist sympathies. And I think that headline was kind of put out there to excuse them, to say, oh, he's just lost in the sea of all these people, when really, no, there was some very specific things going on. And after 7/7, the security services did a similar thing. They excused themselves for not apprehending, well, at least two of the alleged bombers, Mohammed Sadiq Khan and Shahzad Tanweer, by saying that they were just on the periphery of another investigation.
Right.
They said that they represented just 0.1% of the fertilizer bomb plot case. They said that 50 men were essential to the investigation, even though 7 were only went to trial, so there's a few more just disappeared. 40 were said to be on the periphery, and this is where Khan and Tanweer were supposed to have slipped through the net. But when you actually dug a little deeper, and when more of these reports and things came out, it was revealed that, no, actually they were surveilled meeting the plot's ringleader several times. They were followed in a car. This car was logged and databased. There was photos of them taken. Conversations between everyone were bugged. There was a ton of information. So if that was just 0.1% of this investigation, there was probably like the largest investigation in history if they were doing that for everybody, and that was 0.1%. So, you know, that's one parallel. They kind of release these figures and sort of muddy the waters and say they got lost in this giant kind of thing when, well, no, actually you had some very specific information.
Well, absolutely. And again, as more and more with the Manchester, reports and things come out, it does paint a very different picture. And I two things there with what you're saying, backtracking a little bit to, falling in, the narrative that the security, the state needs more money. And I also, saw a lot of, people, there is an election to be held, on Thursday in England right now?
Yeah, just a couple of days.
Yeah. And of course, you're seeing a lot of people, from the Labour Party saying, oh, well, this is also just, indicative of, Theresa May and the Tories, cutting back on police force. If only we had, increased the number of cops out there, somehow this plot could have been stopped, which is, again, a really kind of silly, you could put a policeman in everybody's house in all of Manchester, and this plot still would have probably taken place because obviously, as you're just pointing out, Abedi, much like the 7/7 bombers, they knew exactly what this guy was up to. I mentioned before that Abedi is meant to have, he's portrayed as he was a Libyan refugee. And oddly, when that story was first sort of thrown out there, there's almost no context to this. And I want you to sort of present us with the context. But even more so, it was never presented in the context of he's a Libyan refugee that fled in 2011. When the war against Gadaffi broke out. The way that I kind of read this, and this might just be me, is that, no, he's a Libyan, he just came. That was sort of the way I thought that the media was sort of portraying this, because that, of course, fits into this right-wing narrative that Muslims are flooding into Western Europe. They're going to take over. It's going to be Sharia law, that we really can't trust any refugees. They're all kind of guilty. But Keelan, this is, to me, is probably the crux of this whole story, or the sort of the elephant in the room, is that, Abedi comes from a sort of a long line of Libyan terrorists. And, explain a little bit, when they say that he's a refugee from Libya, or his family, were refugees from Libya, what's the context behind that? Because it's a little bit different from how it's being portrayed out in the media.
Well, yeah, he grew up in this country in a Libyan community in Manchester, which is made up of dissidents who basically got asylum because they were involved in violent revolution against Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. This goes back to the 90s. And this group's terrorism at the time against Gaddafi was very much aligned with British foreign policy, which has been to covertly, and obviously in more recent years overtly, to overthrow Gaddafi, get rid of him. And obviously in 2011 that was finally accomplished. NATO quite openly backed the Islamic extremist rebels. And Gaddafi's ultimate fate was to be sodomized and brutally murdered on camera for the world to see. And Libya is basically now, outside of the core infrastructure in Tripoli or whatever, is basically a failed state full of warring factions and Islamic terrorists. But yeah, MI5 and MI6 were sponsoring extremists against Gaddafi throughout the 90s. The main group there is called the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, one of these typical Western-backed proxy groups, as we saw in Afghanistan, right at the beginning there against the Soviets, then into the Balkans and so on. And if people want to know more about the LIFG, and at least one of their assassination attempts, which was funded and organized directly by MI6, you want to check out Annie Michon's book, Spies, Lies, and Whistleblowers. Your listeners are probably aware of who Annie Michon is.
Sure.
Former intelligence officer who now kind of campaigns against all this. But British taxpayers' money literally exchanged hands with Islamic terrorists. They tried to take out Gaddafi's motorcade. It all went wrong. Innocent civilians died. And so we have there an example of Britain commissioning Islamic terrorism and killing innocent civilians. And this is the same group that Abedi's father, Ramadan, and a bunch of these Manchester-based Libyans were connected to. So, yeah, this goes back a long time. They've been there a long time. This isn't something new. This isn't, Muslims are flooding into Europe. We need to shut the borders. This is Muslims have always been here and always have been protected.
Well, first off, maybe when we're talking about Scandinavia or something, yes, okay. For a lot of people in Sweden, the more recent, in the past 10 years or so, influx of Somali, all sorts of Syrian, Afghan, okay, that might be a bit odd. But first off, let's not kid ourselves. There's always been Muslims living in the United Kingdom. If they didn't want them, they probably shouldn't have colonized Pakistan and India and, a whole bunch of other, Muslim nations all around the world. But there've always been, there's always been a large Muslim presence within the United Kingdom. And as you rightly point out, specifically in the 1990s, like Abedi's family, many of them were, I guess, calling them refugees from Gadaffi is a little bit misleading when his father was a member of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group. And this is like not, what was it? This was like reported in the Metro, which is like a regular ass newspaper in England, and confirmed by people within Libya. So this isn't, this isn't like a rumor on the internet. Again, as you're saying, there were in this small community that Abedi lived in, of course, I can't remember it off the top of my head right now, but one of he was like an Al-Qaeda, master bomb maker, lived like a couple of blocks away from Abedi and his family.
Abd al-Basit Azuz, I think his name. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So this isn't, totally isolated. And, Keelan, again, just to kind of flesh out the LIFG angle a little bit, correct me if I'm wrong, Theresa May, when she was Home Secretary, was sort of, signed off on a lot of these, LIFG members flying all over Europe, right?
Right. And this is a good way, if you're talking to someone and they don't really know what you're on about here, a good way to demonstrate why this whole thing is dubious. I mentioned at the beginning there that I went on holiday. I'm not the most well-traveled person, but on several occasions when I've returned from just, normal European destinations, like a Greek island or something, I've been asked at passport control, where have you been? Why did you go there? What airline were you with? Where else did you go while you were there? And this is a fairly common procedure to sort of double check that you are who you say you are and that you weren't up to any good while you were, overseas. Actually, once I had a friend who was taken aside when we got back into Britain by two men in suits, and he was grilled because he was really tanned. He'd caught the sun and he was a lot more tanned than his passport photo, and they seemed to suspect that perhaps he wasn't him and he'd given his passport to somebody else to sneak into the country or something. But the point I'm making is when the average person faces questioning like that, when they've just traveled to, your average places, how the hell does Abedi travel to Libya and then possibly Syria with all these allied intelligence agencies, who at least should be keeping a close eye on their airlines and their borders and stuff? How does he get to travel to these terrorist hotspots and not get apprehended or tracked or even questioned? The implication is that he is an asset that was allowed to travel to these places. And we now actually do, as you say, we have some pretty strong supporting evidence for that. Some journalists for the Middle East Eye actually tracked down a bunch of these Libyans in Manchester and around the UK and asked them what was going on here. And they say quite clearly that the control orders, which are these kind of special measures that closely monitor them, stop them from traveling, this means MI5 is watching these people. These orders were lifted in 2011 so these Libyans could travel freely to Libya to fight our proxy war against Gadaffi. And in fact, one guy in this article who was interviewed, he says he was stopped at the airport. They asked, what the hell are you doing? Why are you going to Libya? Why are you traveling to these places? And all he had to do was hand over the telephone number to his MI5 handler, and they go, oh, sorry. Okay, yeah, carry on. So there you go, he was allowed to travel to these places where I come back from Greece and they're asking me what I'm doing. So.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think people also sort of shoved it down the memory hole, but if you jog your memory back to 2011, it was openly reported in mainstream media here in the US and I assume in Europe that, there were tons of people, American citizens of Libyan descent that were openly flying back to Libya to engage in the, so-called protest movement and to fight there. And it was openly allowed. You had tons of people you look at the news, you see what's going on in Libya, and then, you get a bunch of, young men, of Libyan descent buying tickets to go to Tripoli and other places. I mean, what do you think they're doing? They're not going there, because the exchange rate is so good or something like that. Clearly they're going there to fight or to, they're not going there for vacation. But this was a thing, you'd see CNN, oh yes, the glorious freedom fighters are going to Libya, and it was totally allowed.
Right, and that's while we're fighting, or supposedly fighting, a war on terror.
Right.
It's like the tables have turned. And Gadaffi, there are a few interviews with Gadaffi and stuff, and he's like, guys, I want to help. I also want to fight the war on terror. Terrorists are also attacking my government and my people. I'm fighting them. Let me join in. And they're like, oh, no, we're going to support the terrorists and kill you. That's what we're doing right now. It's just.
No, yeah. Well, the whole NATO-led war in Libya is like almost just like an afterthought. It's all, it's like beating a dead horse here. You bring it up and it's, oh, who cares? Benghazi's over with. There's no need to look there. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Or, on the flip side, all of these right-wingers harping on and on about, Libya and how horrible it is and they're all terrorists and stuff. And it's like, well, where were you when we were just flooding the entire country with terrorists? But, Keelan, let's take a little bit of time here and actually, look at what happened, the night of May 22nd in Manchester, because, I hope at this point we've sort of fleshed out that, we've got this young kid who, has gone from a lone wolf that was on no radar to he was being monitored by MI5. His father is a member of the LIFG. This kid has somehow been able to travel to Libya, possibly to Syria. Now, what actually took place on, in the sort of, days before and actually on the night of the bombing? Because, again, at first it was just sort of he comes out of nowhere and the bomb goes off. But then the media has sort of attempted to kind of control the story a little bit and present a little bit more evidence. But in sort of, like in an ironic fashion, as they've kind of built up the story of who this person is, they've let go or they've exposed a whole bunch of really fascinating pieces of information that, again, have sort of been glossed over in the mainstream and definitely in the alternative media, which could care less, it seems, about what actually went on. So let's start first and foremost with this these sort of leaked photos that I believe were given to the New York Times against Theresa May's wishes. And they seem to show a very interesting piece of the bomb, some sort of detonator that could be, supposedly, according to the U.S. officials and whatnot, could have been, the bomb could have been exploded remotely. So what's going on with that?
Well, yeah, that's probably one of the most interesting pieces of information that did come out, which, as you say, came from the New York Times. And it's that this bomb was actually, we've been given sort of like this lone wolf narrative that this guy bought all the parts himself, kind of did everything by himself, or at least once he got here, he did it all by himself. But it came out that experts thought this bomb was actually very sophisticated. Some outlets were saying, the bomb is similar to something that the IRA may have used. Others said it was the exact same MO that was used in the Paris Stadium attack. And these photos show a circuit board. They show this alleged detonator. And it was widely reported that experts believe it could have been detonated remotely. Someone further afield could have detonated it. Radio signal. There's talk of maybe using mobile phones and things like that. And they say that, if Abedi lost his nerve and was too scared to go through with a suicide attack, or if the attack just failed and the bomb didn't go off, they could make sure it went off. And if that's true, then there's two very important consequences. One, it kind of disproves the lone wolf theory, because if you have a bomb with a remote detonator, then there's someone who intends to detonate it. And also, it kind of poses the question, was he a willing suicide bomber? If they're so convinced that he was a suicide bomber that acted alone, how do they determine that if someone else could have pressed the button? So, yeah, like you say, some things that have come out have kind of conflicted the official story that they're also running at the same time. There's kind of two stories at once. It's like, well, don't listen to that, but listen to this, but perhaps that happened, but maybe it didn't. But like currently, the official story is that he mostly acted alone, which doesn't really make sense. It doesn't make sense from a lot of the things that have come out, from CCTV to his actions or alleged actions in the hours before and stuff like that.
No, and I want to get to the CCTV footage, because that's another really important factor in here. But Keelan, to the best of your knowledge, do we know what the bomb was composed of? You know, is this like this sort of like ampho fertilizer bomb that that is obvious? You know, I believe that was partly the components in 7/7, and there's definitely the fertilizer bomb plot that kind of preceded 7/7 and is very connected to a lot of those people there. Do we know anything specific about what the bomb was made of?
There doesn't really seem to be anything concrete that's came out in the media. There's kind of insinuations of chemicals in flats and things, but generally, it's referred to as a nail bomb. Kind of like the Boston bombing, where it erupts and all these other bits of material kind of shoot people that are in the vicinity, as well as the actual force of the blast killing people. But no, there doesn't seem to be anything specific as of yet that they've released.
Which again, that kind of strikes me as a bit odd. Generally speaking, a bomb is going to leave all sorts of residue or all sorts of pieces of material. So there, and we'll get to Abedi himself and all of that, but they can figure out who this kid is, apparently, by his debit card in his wallet, yet they can't tell us what the bomb is made out of. And as you said, he's a lone wolf that somehow constructed a very sophisticated bomb. You mentioned people are saying this is very reminiscent of, IRA bombs. And I mean, the IRA were master bomb makers. They knew how to construct very powerful bombs. So that's already kind of raising questions. Did this kid who comes out of nowhere, with no sort of engineering background, that I don't think, nothing that would lead one to believe that this, it's sort of kind of going around in circles, but this again kind of gets again to the crux of the whole thing, is that they're presenting us with like so little in the media narrative. He's like, we're not even being told, that he looked up how to make a bomb, on the internet. That's always the classic, the terrorists, they just Google how to make a nail bomb and then they make one and then they blow it up. We're not even getting that with him. We're just getting these sort of vague assertions that he's a lone wolf that had a bomb with a remote detonator. It was very sophisticated, but we're really not going to give you any more to that. So this should really be raising a lot of questions. And again, it just sort of it feels so sloppy, on behalf of the sort of propaganda arm of terror events, that they're not even giving us a sort of basic. This is what he looks it up on the internet, builds the bomb, and then does it. Instead it's like he's a lone wolf master bomb maker. And that's it, and just kind of accept it and go along with it, even though we're going to throw you.
The media's not even asking like the basic questions. Was he actually a suicide bomber?
Yes.
Was it actually a suicide bombing? If you're going to solve a crime, and if we're going to put it in its proper context, if we want to go back through his history and stuff, we first have to establish that it was actually him.
Yeah. Well, and again, that kind of just strikes me too with the 7/7 and questions of, did the 4 bombers even know what was going on? You know, did they know that they were going to be suicide bombers that day? Or were they possibly, told, you're going to pick up this bag, you're going to go to this place, and then, we'll tell you more. And on that note, Keelan, let's talk a little bit about the CCTV images, because there's been much hay made about them in the media. I'm sure everyone at this point who's looked at this case has seen the now infamous picture of Abedi. He's wearing a hat, he's glasses, a black jacket, what appears to be a backpack. And this is the photo that was plastered, I'm sure, over every screen in the United Kingdom, on every paper in the UK. But it's just him and a black, they've blacked out everything around him. So, what do you make of this? Because, when I first saw this was, how do we even know that was taken in Manchester?
Right, yeah, it was mostly described by the media as him on the way to the arena. And like you say, it's just kind of him cut out, or at least everything around him is blacked out. All we see is Abedi and a black background. Now, obviously, the authorities are not necessarily under any obligation to show us CCTV during an investigation, during an ongoing case. And it is fairly standard to at least blur out people's faces, if you want to hide members of the public, so you don't want to just plaster random people all over the TV. But the point is, for the media to say this is the CCTV showing Abedi on the way to the attack, it's just not true. It doesn't show anything. There is no background. There is no time code. It's meaningless. Its only function is to reinforce the official story, and the media have just decided to repeat that. They could just easily say, this is what we've been given. It's an image of Abedi. It doesn't really show much, but they say this is what it's supposed to be. But they don't even go that far. They just say that's what it is when, well, I'm looking at it. I don't see that.
You can't see anything. You don't know if that was taken. I know that a lot of people have sort of said this is maybe taken from the elevator that he took up to near the entrance to where the bomb actually went off. But who knows? This could have been on a train. This could have been in the anywhere. There's so many cameras all over England. This could have been taken. Who even knows if this was taken the day of? Right. There's no timestamp on anything.
And there's this other CCTV which in some ways goes against the lone wolf theory altogether. It shows him going to it's a Tesco, which is like a supermarket convenience store over here, and he's said to have purchased canned tuna fish, a packet of almonds, and a couple of air fresheners, along with scouring pads, like you might clean an oven with, or a saucepan or something. So firstly, I don't know about you, but my final meal before going to kill myself is not gonna be canned tuna and almonds.
No.
I know it's funny, but the point is, if this guy's a suicide bomber, are you going out to buy snacks and canned tuna before you go and kill yourself? I'm not sure. Also, the air fresheners and stuff and the cleaning stuff, if you're about to kill yourself, are you going to do the dishes? Are you going to clean your oven? Are you going to care whether your flat smells nice? Of course, you might say, well, no, he's covering his tracks. He's getting rid of the chemical bomb smell. He's disposing of evidence. Okay, that does have some logic to it, and I can go with that to a point. But why then does he keep his bank card to be identified after the bombing? Which oddly is kind of the standard identification method over here for terrorism, is people's credit cards and bank cards seem to just appear everywhere. But the point is, is he concealing the crime by cleaning his flat, or does he want to be identified by leaving his bank card? You might even say, well, he wanted to be identified, but he cleaned up the bomb factory to get rid of his ties to a wider network and other people that were involved. But then I thought the official story was that he acted alone and there wasn't a wider network and he constructed the bomb himself. So there are these sort of clear gaps in logic to the lone wolf suicide bomber theory. And of course, that's not even to say that suicide bombers and people that are willing to kill themselves are thinking logically. But if we're going to explore this case and try and come to some kind of conclusion with what we've been told, it seems to me that those aren't the actions of a suicide bomber.
Well, and this also sort of goes against a lot of the sort of, academic work on suicide bombers in that they don't, maybe they would have a last meal, but I don't think they would make their last meal on the way to their target. There's a reason that suicide bombers make videos just before they kill themselves. They have no worldly possessions at that point. What do they care? They don't care if their flat is dirty because they're about to leave this planet. They're leaving this world. The same goes for food who cares if he's hungry? He's about to not be very hungry in a minute. This again, as you said too, is this, did he want to be identified? So he keeps his bank card. Okay, yes. There are tons of instances where a suicide bomber or somebody of that nature wants, he wants to sort of live in infamy. He wants to be, recognized. But, there are for instance, when the Taliban sends suicide bombers to attack, a military target in Kabul or somewhere else, they don't have fucking IDs with them. They don't care. Their identities are never revealed. You're never going to get a news outlet in Afghanistan or anywhere else saying, oh, this is who this Taliban suicide bomber was. It doesn't matter because that's not the point. The point is not to be identified. The point is to strike fear into, the hearts of the infidels. And again, Keelan, you just sort of got me again thinking, maybe he's covering up for a larger plot, which of course begs the question, what larger plot? You're telling us it's not. But at the same time, there's something about you're buying, cleaning supplies, almonds, tuna fish. This sounds like the sort of laundry list, of items for someone who doesn't think they're about to be blown up. Again, this begs the question of, did he even know that he was about to become a suicide bomber? Right.
And we can jump to kind of the evidence from the blast site and eyewitnesses and all sorts of other things. If we touched on the CCTV, there's no CCTV that shows him on the way to the arena until they unblacken that CCTV. There's none of him approaching the entrance from Victoria Station. There's no CCTV of him in the building. Nothing that really places him there. And I'm not saying that can't come out in the future or whatever. I'm not going to go to my grave on that. But there's also no eyewitnesses that really place him there either. And we spoke the other day briefly about this lady who described seeing a man in a bright red top with risen bits beneath his clothing. Okay, that's been kind of passed around the media as evidence that this lady saw the suicide bomber. But nobody else describes seeing a man in a bright red top with risen bits out of it, which you think would kind of stand out in a crowd of people, like the lady said it did. Secondly, when we look at the CCTV stills that we were given and are told that was Abedi going to the arena that night, he's wearing dark clothes. He's not wearing bright red stuff. Now it's not really too clear what she means by risen bits, but we can perhaps, like I say, assume she's talking about like a suicide vest or something underneath his clothing. I think she described it as puffing out from beneath his clothing. The official story is that he used a rucksack bomb, not a vest. And his torso and possibly his head was still intact after the bombing. which would suggest it was a rucksack and he perhaps put it on the floor by his legs or something, because his legs were reportedly blown off. So this lady either saw somebody else who was not Abedi carrying out a suicide attack, or she didn't see anything. And I'm not going to sit here and call her a liar or a plant or something, but science does tell us that eyewitness reports are notoriously unreliable, especially in events like this. People have false memories. The mind kind of fills in the gaps to create a story that makes sense to you, to save you from, going crazy and wondering what the hell happened. And she probably legitimately believes that that's what she saw. But my gut says, based on what we know, that that's probably not what she saw. She's probably having a false memory there.
Yeah, and this is Emma Johnson is this eyewitness, like you said, I mean, either she saw somebody else. I mean, this again this is what I found so fascinating, is that, again, as you say, we've not been presented with any footage of Abedi in the train station, anywhere else in Manchester on that day, and I'm sure they could find footage if they really, looked hard, or they're obviously not showing it. It
looks like the actual CCTV from the Tesco was put out by the Tesco itself. They kind of instigated that being released, because in some of the reports, it's written like alleged CCTV of the guy. And we're not 100% sure that's him, because that's something that came out that wasn't controlled by, the security services or whatever. It kind of came out by itself.
That's fascinating too. Again, I can't help but make, some of the parallels, like even in 7/7, we saw these guys going into Luton Station. Okay. Right. I mean, there's no, they or people that look just like them were there, but these 4 bombers were there at Luton Station. We were at least allowed that. And there was a little bit more footage of them sort of moving around that day. But with Abedi, I mean, there's nothing. We're just given the footage from Tesco's, which doesn't really prove much else other than he bought, a tuna fish, almonds, and air freshener and scouring pads. And then this blacked out photo of Abedi at some point, we're told is in Manchester. But, it's fascinating too. There's no other witnesses, except for this woman who claims that Abedi was wearing some sort of red, jacket or shirt with stuff coming out of it. So again, I sort of, we were sort of tossing this around yesterday, but I'll throw it back to you again, Keelan, why even, quote this person? Why put this out that this is the story? They couldn't find a single other eyewitness that said anything else. Instead they go with a woman who very well might have not made this up, but had a false memory. That, this is what she remembers. But why even use that? Why even put that out there?
I think it's just laziness, and it makes a juicy headline. Somebody saw a suicide bomber, so that's what we're going to run with. It's what the media does. They kind of run with any and all information, and they don't really look to see what fits and what doesn't and question it. It's just 24-hour news cycles. We're just going to throw all this out there. We've been told it's a suicide bomber, so anything that kind of relates to that, then we're just gonna throw that out there. But it doesn't really make any sense if you're actually having any kind of critical thought about it.
Well, and that also, there's also the other quote unquote eyewitness is an off-duty cop, Darren Coster, who was going to pick up his son. And, and his story doesn't really add up all that much either. He also claims to have seen that, a torso with no arms and legs, so definitely not a suicide vest, which would have decapitated somebody. Yet, he says that he saw, he either saw Abedi just before the bomb blast, or he saw him walk through the doors and then the bomb goes off. I mean, he's given like 2 different versions. And again, I mean, I don't think this guy is a liar or some sort of, MI6, MI5 operative that's, being put out there. But as you said, I mean, it's just sloppy reporting.
Well, what he said, he goes, he says, I've got the quote here, I sort of guessed it was a suicide bombing. Then I tried to close the doors because I could see the suicide bomber's body. I could see half of his body halfway inside. I went over and closed the doors because I didn't want anyone seeing that. It looked like he had been blown inside the doors. I didn't want to look. His torso was through the doors and he had no legs. I couldn't see a rucksack. There's a lot to pick through there, but I want to just go back a little bit and just go over where they say the blast was, because what he says is pretty odd when you take into account where the blast was supposed to have taken place. So what was supposed to have happened is he came through Victoria Station, and there's an entrance to the foyer of the arena, and he was supposed to have walked into there. There's a wall of doors at the far end to the left, which takes you into the main bit of the arena. Straight on from the entrance is the box office area, and to the right there's some stairs to some upper floors. The bomb is said to have gone off towards the upper left corner near this sort of wall of doors that are the entrance to the event. Like there's this multiple sets of double doors that take you in. And that's where the confusion comes from, because it's not clear where Abedi's body is supposed to have been discovered and how his body relates to the blast. And I sent you some of these diagrams, but there's multiple diagrams that came out in the media, starting with the New York Times again, where all this info was leaked. And they put his body the other side of the doors inside the main arena event area. And other media diagrams have sort of gone with that. So he went through the foyer, and through the doors and into the main part of the arena after the explosion. However, it's written in the New York Times article that, I'll just read it out. It says, the authorities' review of the blast site shows that many of the fatalities occurred in nearly a complete circle around the bomber, whose upper torso was heaved outside the lethal ring toward the Manchester Arena entrance. So not inside the event area, not inside the doors, not the other side of the doors, but just towards that wall of doors. So that begs the question, why did the diagrams put on the other side of the doors? So then we go to this eyewitness, Darren Costa, who for some reason automatically assumes that it's a suicide bombing, automatically assumes that this body is that of the suicide bombers, and tries to sort of, well, it's not really clear, but close him outside of those doors, move the body through the doors.
Yeah, I know.
To shut them. Like, why is he tampering with a crime scene? And why is he 100% sure that this is the bomber? He could have just been moving a victim somewhere. Like, who's this guy to be running around moving bodies and stuff?
And he's supposed to be a cop.
Well, he's former military police sergeant. So I don't understand why he automatically thought that was the bomber when there's all kinds of victims and people with their limbs missing and stuff, and why he thought it was okay to either shut the doors or move him away. But another point is he wasn't moving him away if he shut those doors and pushed him through into that area, because that was the arena. So that's where lots of people are leaving. That's not hiding the body. That's exposing the body to everyone that's leaving the arena. So none of that really makes any kind of sense.
No, and, then I think this also sort of brings up the question of, was Abedi at the center of the bomb blast, and somehow his body is thrown, as in these diagrams, fairly far away. And here we are, we're coming up on the break. We're going to continue this discussion with Keelan Balderson in the second hour. So lots more, so stay tuned.
deadly narcotic.
Freedom.
Oh, yes, I like very much.
Radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
And I hope people support American Freedom Radio. And I hope people vote with their dollars and really understand the value of having American Freedom Radio. Because that's my family. If you love me at all, Jack Blood, support American Freedom Radio. Like, my family has literally disowned me in American Freedom Radio. Danny and Don and those guys, those are my actual family. So please support these guys, because they have all the technology, they have all these great things that they're going to do, but obviously they can't do it all by themselves. So not only would I like to see you support them, I'd like to see you retweet them and repost them and really get involved and get on the bandwagon, so to speak, on doing that do-it-yourself promotion, because they're a do-it-yourself radio network, and we just need that so much.
Did you know there are 3 million edible food plants on Earth, and none have the nutritional value of the hemp plant? HempUSA.org offers you hemp protein powder. It does not contain chemicals or THC, is non-GMO, and is 100% gluten-free. Hemp protein powder burns fat, builds muscle, contains 53% protein, and feeds the body the nutrients it needs. Call 888-910-4367 and see what our powder, seeds, and oil can do for you. Only at HempUSA.org. HempUSA.org introduces 3 brand new detox formulations of micro plant powder. Brain Fuel for depression, bipolar disorders, and stress. Total Care, anti-cancer agent that cleans the liver and organs and increases memory. Rejuvenate, invigorates and heals the body, mind, and spirit. These products are your alternative to pharmaceuticals. Call 888-910-4367 and like us on Facebook. We ship worldwide. Only at HempUSA.org.
This is Rick Simpson, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
What about show business? Show business, completely dishonest, corrupt, and full of shit, but in a nice way. Plenty of expensive drugs and perverted sex. If you're going to be full of shit, might as well enjoy your work. Then you have the media. Not just the news media, let's include them all. The media are almost literally exploding with bullshit because they're located right at the crossroads of all the other bullshit. The media are made up of equal parts advertising, politics, business, public relations, and show business. These people are sitting right at bullshit junction. There's enough bullshit in the media for Texas to open a branch office. And you still have enough left over to start 2 law firms and a Christian bookstore.
What has American Freedom Radio ever done for us?
Provide us for free education?
Well, that's obviously effective, but apart from reversing the dumbing down of America...
All the information they provide is free?
What about the free podium for broadcast activists to speak from, man?
Exploiting commonplace corruption?
They help vulnerable people who don't have a voice?
Bringing light to important information nobody else does.
Or they never censor, hang up, or cut off their guests? Well, that's no fun, is it?
Oh, they created a fantastic alternative media source during an era of bad, manipulative, and infiltrated mainstream and alternative media shows and scum.
Okay, well, apart from the free education, free information, free podium for broadcast activists to speak from, exposing commonplace corruption, helping vulnerable people without a voice, bringing light to important information nobody else does, and creating a fantastic commercial-free alternative media source in a sea of bad, manipulative mainstream and alternative media shills and scum, what has American Freedom Radio ever done for us?
Donate to American Freedom Radio today.
No rules. No rules. No taboo topics. No taboo topics. No fear of doom. No fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio. Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City. Your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. I'm your host, Pierce Redmond. If you are just joining us here in the second hour, we have been speaking with Keelan Balderson, who runs the website wideshut.co.uk, and we have been talking all about the Manchester bombing. We were just before the break, Keelan, because I wanted to just kind of, finish up on this. We were talking a little bit about the some of the sort of forensic evidence, or at least what we've been presented with, in terms of where Abedi was, where the bomb blast was, and you were just brilliantly laying out all of the sort of discrepancies about some of the eyewitness accounts, some of the sort of differing diagrams that we have been shown in the media about where the bomb was, where Abedi's body was, and the sort of final thing I wanted to kind of get to with that is that you sent me some of the diagrams, various ones that have been printed in the media, and I mean they show the spot where Abedi's body allegedly is supposed to have been found is quite far from where the bomb blast was, or where the bomb itself was. So this, of course, raises the question of, did Abedi leave his backpack unattended, which, again, in this day and age, believe me, even I get, freaked out when I get on a train in the city and you just see this, an all black backpack shoved underneath the seat. And it's like, okay, somebody just got off the train and accidentally left it or whatnot. But in the back of my, your mind, you're kind of sweating, you're nervous. You're like, oh God, is this it? You look around, these are the last people I'm going to see. So, again, you'd think, he leaves what had to have been a large backpack in the middle of the entrance to the arena, and then he walks away, or was his body, flung several, yards, meters away? I mean, what do you make of that? Because again, I think this sort of raises the question of, was Abedi, was he an unwitting suicide bomber? Did he know this is what was going to happen?
Well, like you say, the diagrams kind of have this central area where the bomb was supposed to have gone off, and then there's a ring of bodies that encircle that, which look fairly straightforward. There's a couple that are really far away, and then there's his that's really far away, but also, like I said earlier, the other side of some doors, and we had that eyewitness that said he may have saw him the other side of the doors, or put him the other side of doors and shut the doors, or whatever. But if he was in sort of like these crowds of people that had come to meet and pick up children and friends and whatever from the arena, and people were leaving the arena to meet their family and friends and whatever, and he's in the middle of these crowds of people when this bomb is supposed to have gone off, it doesn't seem logical to me that he would end up where it says he ended up. He would be colliding with other people and bodies. That would have slowed him down. He would have, who's to say he wouldn't have hit the door frames or the wall or something? How does he go through the doors? It just seems very perfect for him to get from there to where it said he did. And like you say, does that mean he was an unwitting suicide bomber? Does that mean he left the backpack there and moved somewhere else and it went off? Does that mean his body was put there, like this guy kind of insinuated might have happened? The point is, there's just all sorts of different conflicting stories that we can't really say with 100% certainty what happened. It's just a case of, security services or whoever, please do better, because we don't understand.
And, I sort of said this to you the other day when we were chatting about this, but maybe this is also just a matter of, let's just throw everything out there and, including fake information or false information, which is, to a degree, was what was going on with 7/7. They threw out a ton of garbage, that they, knew was bullshit at the time. And they don't even really have to acknowledge that it's bullshit. They can just kind of pretend like they never said it, or they just don't bring it up again. But the sort of the narrative that I guess fits the most, becomes the most widely accepted, that's the one that they all kind of go with. And then,
they cherry pick, they kind of cherry pick the bits that suit their story, or even doesn't even match properly, but they kind of massage it to match properly. And they ignore other eyewitnesses and they just kind of craft a narrative rather than actually just following where it leads.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, and it's almost this sort of like improvisational, they'll put this out there and then, so the, outlets aren't really following that, or people aren't really questioning it, so cool, that's what we'll go with, cause then, again, just to recap, then you're left in a situation where you've got, a bomber who may have been wearing a red coat or a black coat, who maybe set off the bomb in the middle, or maybe left his bag there, and then is either blown clear across this giant room, or dies at that room, or his body is moved there. I mean, the story just sort of almost to the point where I think they also kind of do it just knowing that people aren't, they don't want to kind of expend the mental capacity trying to figure all of this out. And you're just like, sure, whatever. His body is shot across. I almost forgot, actually. He was supposed to have been identified by his bank card, but also facial recognition technology. So that would tell me that his head was still intact on his body, or somehow his head was decapitated, but somehow remained in good enough condition to, be placed in front of some kind of computer thing or whatever. Yeah, they don't even explain how the facial recognition. Yeah, exactly. Like, did they just? Right. I mean, this is very gruesome, but they pick up his head and bring it somewhere to be photographed. I mean, that was another one of these amazing pieces. It's like, right. Again, his bank card somehow makes it. Okay. This is like reminiscent of, passports found at the, in the 9/11 rubble.
Well, on 7/7, it's quite humorous where one guy's, bank cards from one guy are like multiple different explosions.
Yes, right. Yeah, right. Every explosion, he's leaving another card.
It's like, was he just handing out credit cards? Like, well, you can take that one. Like,
yeah. I'm gonna leave this one here, and then at the other place. Yeah, no, it's funny too. Again, I think it's a great way to illustrate to the listeners too the way that these stories kind of unravel, because now it seems as if if you're turning on the 6 o'clock news and they're doing a recap, they're all going to say identified by his bank card. No one is going with this facial recognition thing, but it was put out there. And it sort of, again, it just sort of illustrates the sort of weird method that the security services use when leaking to the media. Let's just throw everything we've got, and whatever ends up making the most sense, or whatever people feel the most comfortable. Apparently, in this day and age, everyone is comfortable with a terrorist carrying their bank cards around, and somehow they're in perfect condition. So, a lot of questions to be asked there. And just before, because I want to get to the whole his family's response to all of this, but just again with this, we just to sort of throw it out there to the listeners, we live in this age where everything is recorded. First off, does this we haven't really seen anything the cliched terrorist stuff that on his social media, So he wasn't posting about ISIS on Facebook. He wasn't, making videos with him ranting, with his index finger up. That to me is very odd, that he seems to have seemingly no kind of online presence. Whereas, traditionally, in the past, 10 years or so, all terrorists are online, and everything they're radicalized online. They were posting, they were going to, attack some target on Facebook just before they do it, and the authorities missed it again. That to me is very odd. And also that we live in this age where we're constantly being photographed and recorded everywhere we go. Yet again, there's really nothing, this is very kind of conspiratorial, but I mean, what's the evidence that Abedi was even there that day?
We would have to wait. Really, we would have to wait for some kind of an inquest or an inquiry where this stuff could at least be asked for, whether it would be or not, or whatever. But I've not really heard any. We don't really know where they're going with it. What's going to happen? They've arrested all these people, so it's possible that there will be some kind of related trial, even though they said that he's a lone wolf. And again, it's just sort of like mixed stories. It's like you say, they'll just kind of go where it goes, but not really. It's just...
Yeah. It's not the way criminal investigations are supposed to work. And again, it's so easy in a large-scale terrorist attack or any sort of, it doesn't have to be a terrorist. It could be, we're using a very loose definition of terrorist here, but any sort of mass killing. It should be treated like a crime scene, like any sort of investigation, whether it be, some guy that freaks out and kills his wife, or a radicalized jihadi who went to Libya, learned how to make a bomb, and then returned to Manchester to blow it up. But this is this trend that we're seeing where we don't really treat these as investigations. Again, in the fact that we're told instantly, this is who did it. Before we even know the facts of how many people have been killed, what's going on, nothing like that.
Yeah, we didn't know him, but now all of a sudden it's immediately him, and we know everyone he knows and how to arrest them and where to find them. And
yeah. Oh, I know. I love that too. All of these mass arrests, and that seems to be a tactic that's often used. I think particularly when it comes to the UK, there's some attack, 50 people are, immediately rounded up, which is, that sort of, poses two questions there. One, did you know who these people were previously? You either have a list of people connected to Abedi, in which case, is there a larger plot, or they're just randomly, let's just get the usual suspects of pissed off, Muslim guys. In
you either know who these people are and who this network is, which begs the question, so why didn't you stop the attack to begin with if you are monitoring them and you know where they are? Or you're just arresting random people.
Yeah, no, exactly, and we're gonna get to it in a little bit, but it was just I just saw like AP reporting with there were like a ton of people, I think like 8 or 9 individuals were arrested in connection to the London attack, and they've just been released without charge. So, who were they? Did they have any connection to those 3 people? But before we get into London, Keelan, give us a little bit of insight into how Abedi's family has responded to this, because a lot of time when we have these sort of crazy and again, in spite of what the media has, especially the alt media, oh my God, England is under attack right now. I mean, there have been multiple. First off, England has always had terrorism. The IRA, and I don't know. I always, whenever there's an attack like this, I always look at, the synchronicity and with timing of things, and of course. On June 16th, 1996, the IRA bombed Manchester in a huge, it was like a 3,000-pound truck bomb. So again, I don't know if that really means too much, but it just sort of, it's interesting, the timing and anniversaries that always sort of plays in when you have like big events, at least in just sort of keeping it in people's minds, and they sort of remember that, and I think it makes it easier for people to accept things. But what as I was saying, in those sort of events where we get like the not the most recent attack in London, but the one at Westminster recently, almost nothing. These are just sort of crazy people. But Abedi, much like the Boston bombers, had a family. He was a young kid, and we know we know his father was in the LIFG. But what has the family response been to this? Because that is also one of these bizarre chapters that is getting almost no scrutiny whatsoever from the media.
Yeah, it's very curious because, we have sort of responses from the family directly to the media, but we also have responses allegedly from the family through other sources, and they contradict each other. So you have to question, who's lying. So to start with, before the bombing, U.S. intelligence, not before the bombing, but after the bombing, but about before the bombing, U.S. intelligence say that the family themselves reported Salman several months back because they feared he'd become dangerous and they were worried about him. He'd become radicalized. So to start with, if we go with that, that suggests that yes, they feared he was capable of terrorism and could possibly do something down the road. They were that worried about their own family member that they shopped him to whoever. U.S. intelligence say that that's what happened. Yet, in an interview before, because the family all got arrested in Libya, but in an interview before that happened, but after the bombing, his father Ramadan said there were no signs of radicalization. His son seemed normal in the days before the attacks. He said, we don't believe in killing children. We don't believe in killing innocents. So that completely contradicts that other report. So now the family's saying, we didn't think Salman was capable of terrorism. In fact, the father went as far as to say, and this is to the media directly from the father, that there are forces at work in the UK that are working to make Muslims in the West look bad. So it's almost like the father is saying, well, was my son set up? Was this a false flag? So that completely contradicts that earlier report. Then the family gets arrested in Tripoli. And we get a string of quotes from Libyan sources, the authorities in Libya, that say the mother admits to receiving a farewell phone call. The brother Hashim is said to have known all the details of the attack, knew about all the plotting beforehand and all that kind of thing. So again, it's flipped around. Yeah. Now they did know about the attack.
And the brother, really is like, I knew it was happening.
And then his sister, I can't quite remember where in the timeline this happened, but his sister tells the Wall Street Journal that she doesn't really know why her brother did it, or maybe even if her brother did do it, but she thinks if he did do it, it was because he was angry that the West were bombing children in Syria, which is kind of something else. And it fuels a different narrative. It kind of fuels the idea of blowback, which in that case doesn't really make sense because everybody in Syria is killing civilians. ISIS are killing civilians. Assad has killed civilians. The people we backed have killed civilians. It's not really us bombing Syria. That's not how this conflict is playing out. In many respects, we're supporting the Islamic extremists against Assad. So just that sort of vague idea that he was mad that we were bombing children in Syria, it doesn't really make sense to what's happening on the ground in Syria anyway. That's just another narrative that's been claimed that family members have said. So yeah, it's like, who's playing who here? Are the Libyans lying? Are the family lying? Who's playing who?
Well, and also too, you don't want to believe it, but is the family just sort of not selling out their son, but you would think, that even if they knew he did it, generally speaking, if your family member is accused of something like this, your first response is, I can't believe that this happened. Or, or maybe there's some reason behind this, or maybe there's something else involved. But to just sort of as you say, just sort of be like, oh, I mean, his brother is almost priceless. He's like, oh yeah, of course, I knew he was going to do something like this, and the second I heard about it on the news, oh God, it must have been, Salman, who was behind this. I mean, that's such an odd response to have. And then as you say, I mean, this initial, statements by the father, who I think at first denied it, said there's no way it was my son. And then, sort of alluding to, is there a larger plot, at stake here? Is there more than meets the eye? Is the British government, encouraging certain young Muslim men to carry out events like this? It's very sort of, it's an odd, it's a lot of odd statements. And again, I think it just sort of adds to this very murky picture where we oddly are presented with all of this information, we knew what he was doing, blah, 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 but we're not anywhere closer to understanding what actually took place there, than we were, back on the 22nd of May when this happened. I do want to get to the London stuff, but I think we would be remiss if we didn't kind of, touch on the alt media response to this. Because this is just like, this to me kind of solidified how lame and, just idiotic the alt media is. I mean, the response has basically been, either some people kind of going with this blowback thing, which, as you say, I mean, makes no sense. And you would think, where are the Syrian terrorists coming here? If we're bombing Syria, I mean, we've been bombing Afghanistan since 2001, but there have been no, Afghan terrorists that travel to either London or New York or Washington and blow themselves up. That's not blowback. But Keelan, give us your sort of perspective from the alt media, the Paul Joseph Watsons of the world, because they've basically just sort of gone with just the typical right wing, they're Muslims. Of course they did it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really know when this change happened, but there is a very clear, line, within certain elements of the alt media where they've gone from questioning official narratives and trying, or at least giving the impression that they're trying to look deeply into the causes of terrorism, the deep state causes of terrorism, whether official stories are true, why are we sponsoring terrorists all over the world and all this kind of thing, to, we need to talk about Islam. Islam is the problem. Muslims are overtaking Europe. We need to shut the borders. Shouting at the camera like madmen. It's like, what are you doing? It really doesn't make much sense. It's just a superficial kind of hatred of Islam. One of the things they always go on about as well is, we need to talk about Islam. We need to talk about the Muslims. Why is the left not talking about the Muslims? Hang on a minute. For the past 15 years, the media has been telling us that Muslims are terrorists. What are you talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
So, I don't really get it. And the left, again, they're not really engaging in this as deeply as you would hope they would be doing. Like you say, they kind of talk about blowback in the sense of, well, we're bombing them, so they're bombing us. But that's not exactly what's happening. We're supporting Islamic terrorists, and they're bombing our targets. It's a lot more complex than they try and make it out. And Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader who's up against Theresa May in this election, he could hang her out to dry. Yeah. He could be saying, look, she lifted the control orders. There was all this support for Libyan extremists and this happened. And he's not even gone there. all he's done is like, we need more police. Like,
yeah. No, I mean, he's fed into the sort of, right-wing, pseudo-fascist ideology as well. As you said, we need more police. We need to, as long as we have more police, and we will, we'll be able to stop this if the security services have more of an opportunity. But as you say, he could be hammering Theresa May on, what were you doing when you were Home Secretary? Why did you allow for all of these, Libyans and so, and I mean, as far as I know, I mean, it's not, does Corbyn have, I don't see that there's anything that, if him saying this would open him up for some sort of political attack. I mean, he's not the one, that was, doing this. I mean, there's no, it's not like, if he goes down that road, then it's, but Corbyn, what about when you were, helping this terrorist out or something? I mean, I know that the media there has portrayed Corbyn as some sort of terrorist sympathizer, that he's some sort of, secret IRA agent or something like that. But I mean, that's just sort of the typical, he's, slightly left wing, therefore he must be evil. But like you say, I mean, I don't know, he has nothing to lose by this, by going after this. Yet I don't know what, I mean, I guess it's just sort of that moment when you realize, even Corbyn's not the answer really either. In much the same way that, Bernie Sanders or Jill Stein wasn't the answer that the left wing here, was really looking for. And this again, just sort of, reminiscent of Gladio, and not this sort of, Gladio B, that sort of idea that is, taken storm in the alternative media. But, the sort of old school, like Italian and Turkish and Greek, iterations of Gladio, whereby you have, right-wing terrorists basically staging bombings in order to hurt left-wing politicians. And that, on some level is what is going on here. No, go ahead, Keelan.
Yeah, well, the first major poll conducted after the London attack, showed that the Conservatives, lead over Labour was 7% and had risen since the attacks. So you can put it in that kind of, even if, we can't prove that it was a Gladio kind of attack, it's had the same effect. Theresa May was given her second chance here to capitalize on the attack, and, and her, she's improved in the polls because of it. And, the general idea is when people are scared, when something like this has happened and you don't really know why it's happened and you want something to be done, and there's all this tension from the right screaming about like Islam taking over Europe, and the left is talking about blowback and everything, you vote for the status quo. You want everything to be the same. You want some stability, and she's been portrayed as the strong and stable leader. And it seems to have worked that way for her. Her rating's going up. And Corbyn has basically pledged his support for the security state. So if Labour wins, it's still the status quo. Maybe he's scared. Maybe he's seen this and thought, well, what the hell's going on here? Or maybe I should just fall in line. I don't know. I don't really know. We don't really know what's going on behind the scenes, but that seems to be how it's gone.
No, and I was saying when during the commercial break, I was listening to the John Batchelor show, and Batchelor had on a British journalist. I think he was from Market Watch. I was trying to look it up, and this British journalist openly stating, thank God for this, because this is boosting May's popularity and support. And, again, you look at the polls sort of previous to that, Labour is just creeping upwards. People are really kind of fed up with Theresa May and the Tories and whatnot. And, again, it's like this open admission that, she needed this. She needed some catalyzing event that she could use to her political benefit. And again, our good friend Tom Secker was pointed out in some posts, I think it was on Facebook that he made, the similarities between the election as it was unfolding and and House of Cards, the original, the actual good version of House of Cards, the British one, where this exact same thing happens, where Francis Urquhart is faced with a sort of left-wing populist sort of a politician who's getting all this support, and he stages an IRA-style bombing in order to sway the election at the last minute. That's not, I don't think that's too cynical to think about. And Theresa May is a horrible person. Who knows how involved, if that's what happened, how involved she may or may not have been. But, I mean, clearly she doesn't really give a shit.
Well, regardless of what led to the attacks happening, she's going to exploit it. And she's also used it to sort of shoe in her internet regulation agenda. Her immediate response after this, when she gave her speech, was that, we need to regulate the internet further. She didn't really explain exactly why or how that's going to be done. But this has been one of her pet projects for several years. Last year, they finally got through the Investigatory Powers Act, which is, like we call it, the Snoopers Charter, which means the internet history of everyone in the UK is stored wholesale for 12 months, regardless of whether you're suspected of a crime or not. Basically, every web page you've been to, every video you've loaded, or everything is just stored. And they also have the power to hack mobile devices and your social media accounts if the authorities deem that, that's warranted. And they have this kind of rubber stamp warrant system where they can go, yeah, we need to look at this guy, and the judge will just go like, bang, there you go.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then the third bit to that legislation is they can hack anybody if they think there's a piece of information, they don't know where it is, but they think it's there, so they'll hack everything wholesale, and then if it's there, it's there. If it's not, it's not. They've probably got your, pictures of your kids from Facebook in the process. They're allowed to do that now. So all that already exists, and we were told at the time that we need to bring this in to stop terrorism. Well, guess which terror attacks the Snoopers Charter failed to stop? All the ones that just happened. And she's using this to take it further in some way. She's totally capitalizing on it.
No, great bringing up this sort of snooper charter, and we'll link up to you. You did a great video a couple months back, Keelan, on Theresa May and this whole issue, which again is just sort of like kind of just sort of like snuck by. It's just one of these because when you're actually presented with what's in these sort of bills and these laws, I mean they're terrifying. As you say, 12 months, they're just going to keep all of your internet history, which is, again, not to mention just sort of invasion of privacy, but, if they ever had to if they ever wanted to blackmail somebody, great. And it could be something simple. You want your wife knowing you're, on some porn site or doing this, so help us out with our investigation.
Yeah, and the other issue is we're always told about cyber terrorism. Who's to say a foreign government doesn't hack the database and get information on all of the citizens, or gets information on the politicians and uses it against them? Our government is notorious for losing databases, like people leave databases on CDs in the back of taxis.
Right,
just all sorts of weird stuff like that. And we're told to be scared of hackings and cybersecurity, and you've just gone and made all these people wholesale store our data. They're ripe to be hacked.
Exactly. Yeah, no, exactly. It's almost like an open invitation. Well, let's we've got about a half an hour or so left. And I do want to talk a bit about, what just happened, in London on the London Bridge, and then, in, Borough Market. So this is, again, anybody that doesn't know, on June 3rd, 3 terrorists, killed 6 and injured 48 after they rammed, into people in a van on London Bridge, and then I guess after the van had crashed, they get out on foot and they began stabbing people left and right all throughout Borough Market until they were eventually shot and killed by the police. Originally, when the story first broke, only 2 of the 3 were identified, which is again odd that they can identify Abedi hours after the attack. But they couldn't identify, one guy who was just shot. I mean, that's it. It wasn't like he was blown apart. But we have a Pakistani-born Keelan Butt, who seems to be the mastermind, of the attack. He was featured in a Channel 4 documentary, ironically, about Islamic extremism. He was also known to the security services for quite some time, but they claim that there was really no evidence that he was planning an attack. He wasn't a big deal. It's now come to light that Butt was also a member or associated with al-Muhajiroun, which I want you to talk about in a minute, Keelan. Then we have another guy, Moroccan, Libyan-born Rashid Redouane. Not much is known about him other than that he married a British woman and was found carrying an Irish ID and was believed to have lived in Ireland. And I don't have it up in front of me, but there was a third. The third suspect was identified. He was, I think he was Moroccan, but lived in Italy.
He's a Moroccan Italian, yeah. Yeah,
and we'll link up to all of that. But I mean, Keelan, what do you make of this? I mean, this is I know that Theresa May was saying that, was talking about copycat killers and, that she doesn't want, and then of course this happens. But do you think there's any connection between the two, or is this, if this is all part of a larger intelligence operation, I mean, is this just meant to, we got to keep ramping up the fear until the election on Thursday?
Well, there's nothing overt to say that the 2 attacks are connected other than the timing, really. But what we do know, which is just a repeat of every single attack that seems to ever happen, is that they were known, again, to the intelligence services. You mentioned the first guy there, also the Rashid Redouane, this guy who was residing in Ireland. There are reports that people did report him to the Irish authorities for extremism, and there was a kind of community of extremists in Dublin, and the Irish did nothing about that. The other guy, this Youssef Zagba, the Moroccan Italian, this 22-year-old, Italy say they flagged him going to Syria. They asked him, why are you going to Syria? He said, I'm going to be a terrorist. And they say they warned the UK authorities about this because he moved to the UK. I mean,
and that's it. They don't arrest him or,
Right. So, I am a terrorist. Okay, come in.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's the same pattern. They were all known. And this Keelan Butt, like you say, is said to have links to al-Muhajiroun, which is this interesting group that was in the UK through the 90s, eventually got banned. But it was led by a guy called Omar Bakri Mohammed. And in public interviews, he has said that he had public immunity from, being arrested and any of that kind of thing. Because at the time, obviously, Blair was having his first dirty war in the Balkans. And Bakri basically said we were permitted to let British-based Muslims go to Pakistan and other places to train as terrorists, so then they can go to the Balkans and fight that dirty war against Milosevic. So another one of those, it's what we're seeing in Libya. It was the same thing, but just a different proxy war. And this guy was supposed to be tied to that. I mean, many people are tied to that group. It was quite a large group, and, it spiders out everywhere. But that's just an example of how we're supporting and protecting and arming and doing all these things with these guys. And then we wonder why this stuff bites us in the ass. You can't really call it blowback. It keeps happening. It's expected. It's predictable. It's what happens. So we have to ask why.
And again, too, I mean, the al-Muhajiroun is. I mean, there's a ton of other MI5 informants that were within the group, and it's like almost like a joke. Like if you were part of it, you were working for MI5 or MI5 was definitely monitoring you. So I mean, just again, I mean, of course, this guy Keelan Butt was a member of them, and he was, in this Channel 4 documentary, he was like part of some group of young Muslim men that would gather around in some park in London, and they would whip out like an ISIS flag, and they would talk about the caliphate and how England will soon be under Sharia law. And he, unlike Salman Abedi, who looks like any average, kid in anywhere, it doesn't have to just be Manchester, it could be anywhere. Keelan Butt, he's got the long beard. He's like the prototypical sort of real bad Arab, and he's talking with his index finger up, and very much kind of, I think, like, I almost sort of viewed this as like just further comfort. If you didn't already think the Muslims were out to get us because you look at Abedi and he looks just, he's just like some nerdy kid. Well, here you go. Here's a guy with a long beard who yelled on camera, and was, parading around London with an ISIS flag. And then of course, ISIS has claimed responsibility for the London Bridge attack on Amok, which is their news agency, which is again one of these, you just talk about May wanting to regulate the internet, but yet news sites like Amok somehow operate, and and it's like an encrypted app that you can download. Yet, I mean, they can't shut that down, or they're not monitoring that at all. And also, with the London attack, we have the attackers were said to have been shouting, "This is for Allah," which again fits much more into the sort of terrorist cliche. Because, you would think with the Manchester thing, maybe you would hear something like that, but we've nothing. I mean, there's again, that sort of begs the question with the Manchester. I mean, is it even about Islam with that attack? Clearly, with London, if they never said this is for Allah, that's what we've all been told. So it is about Allah, and this is sort of about attacking, our freedoms and stuff like that. So, I think it just sort of falls into that line. And just briefly, because then I want to kind of get your sort of big overview on all this. I just wanted to mention too, on the geopolitical front, just today, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, the Maldives, the exile government in Yemen, and about a third of the Libyan government have cut ties with Qatar, ostensibly over Iran, but the timing is very interesting. Donald Trump has sort of, thrown Qatar under the bus, saying they're terrorists, they've been funding terrorists. And all of the, surrounding nations around Qatar have shut their borders off, including air and sea travel. So, the people have been hoarding food all over Qatar because they don't know when they're going to get, I guess, their next meal. So just, I don't, not that they're intimately connected, but keep that in mind, we've got these two big terror attacks, and then, Saudi Arabia, obviously a beacon of freedom and, opposition to terrorism, is saying that Qatar is the ultimate terrorist, and we've got to, starve them out or something. I mean, I don't know what they're going to do.
It's like they've been thrown under the bus. Like, you have all these countries that also sponsor terrorism. Like Theresa May, arms sales to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
That's even quite a well-known thing in the mainstream media. And it's almost like they're just being seen to do something on the international scale, when really, they've not really done anything, because if you think about it, NATO-backed countries are at the moment perhaps one of the primary, sponsors of Islamic terrorism internationally. And Saudi Arabia, our allies where we send weapons and stuff to, they're also one of the exporters of terrorism. They're the exporter of the ideology that ISIS follow. This is, the hand-chopping, head-chopping Islamic State. That's what Saudi Arabia is. So if you want to look at why there is Islamic terrorism, then look at NATO supporting it and our support for Saudi Arabia and all this stuff. Don't just throw Qatar under the bus.
Which is not to give Qatar a free pass. Obviously, they support all sorts of people like this, but only because, the West and NATO allowed them to. And Trump fucking running his mouth talking about Qatar. I mean, we have a massive military base there. You know what I mean? Are we going to evacuate those soldiers? Are they, or we're just going to forget about them? I mean, we have a massive military base there, which we use to quote fight Daesh and, ISIS and all these, whatever they're calling themselves today. It's just ridiculous. But, Keelan, we've got around 10, 15 minutes. What do you, I guess I kind of want to get your take. I mean, what do you see as happening specifically to the United Kingdom? Because while obviously there have been terrorist events, recently, there's been a whole string of them in London and other things. But, I mean, where do you see this sort of heading? Is this sort of the beginning of a new era? I know that people are saying, this isn't like 9/11, but this is the biggest attack since 7/7. So, do you see the UK moving in a different direction vis-a-vis terrorism and foreign policy as well as domestic policy?
Well, there's a lot of talk of we've got to do something. We need to stop appeasing terrorism over here. Just the average person in the street is angry. They want something to be done. I have housemates that are like, we need to go bomb them now because okay, we were doing the kind of lefty, let's be nice kind of thing, but now now's the time. And there's a lot of anger, and we just got to be careful not to have that channeled into the wrong thing. They keep talking about, at the moment, the mantra is police. And the Conservative government cut policing, and the Labour government are now like, well, Theresa May made us unsafe, so now we need more police, or more internet regulation or whatever. But you can't keep throwing money and power at the state. That's the opposite of what we need to be doing to prevent terror attacks. It would make sense if we could trust the state and they had a good track record. But when time and time again we've sponsored and armed and trained Islamic terrorists, we've colluded with terrorists, commissioned terrorism, and when terrorists known to the intelligence agencies who are tied to the same groups carry out attacks, we shouldn't be giving these agencies and these people more power. We should be asking, why the hell is this happening? We should be draining the swamp, getting rid of all these people, overhauling that system. At what point do we say, let's look at false flag terrorism? Maybe this is like Gladio. If it keeps happening, maybe we should go there.
And that sort of makes me wonder again if this sort of the shift that we've seen in the alt media and the conspiracy culture, which has gone from, everything is a false flag to everything is fake, all the way to, no, it's real. Like, we should just accept this. This is real and the Muslims are against us. And if that isn't just sort of part of an overarching, plan or something that they put in place, just sort of like, this is it. This is the direction where, everybody has to now love the state. And they can do no wrong. And that's what's so shocking to me is the amount of people that are just sort of accepting what Donald Trump or Theresa May says, and they're just sort of buying into it. And these are supposed to be the people that were awake. And yet essentially all they're telling us is, as you said, that the state, we just have to throw more money at this massively corrupt organization that is the root cause of all of this. So sort of, troubling, I don't know, like next couple of years probably. Quickly, Keelan, do you think Theresa May is going to win this new election?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. She's basically been in the lead the whole time. And now the poll after the attack, she's risen a little bit. So, yeah, I think probably people will just vote for the status quo.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess if I was a betting man, I would probably say the same thing too. Which is just pathetic, especially given her recent admission, that the naughtiest thing she's ever done is run through the fields of wheat, upsetting the farmers. I mean, this is like, come on.
I didn't hear that, but.
Oh yeah, I think she was interviewed earlier today, and she was asked what the naughtiest thing she ever did. Of course, she was, looked like she had no fucking clue what to say. And she babbled on a little bit, and then she said, oh, I guess when I was a girl, me and my friends would run through the fields of wheat. That would upset the farmers. That was the naughtiest thing we did, which is just
maybe it was lifting control orders. Maybe that.
Yeah, I know, exactly, yeah. Or it's like, you couldn't just think of something, like you pissed off your mother or something like that. I mean, make something up. I mean, that's the best line that you can come up with. Is running through the fields of wheat. Keelan, we'll sort of ending this on a bit of a happy note there, but please tell the listeners where can they go to find your work, and any way to all your stuff, YouTube, Twitter, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, you want to go to wideshut.co.uk. It's a bit jumbled out at the minute. I've not had time really recently to focus on it, but if you go to the category section, you'll find a great section on the Boston bombing. Mm-hmm. You'll find all sorts of stuff on 7/7, and a lot of stuff I did in the past is pretty good on there. And click through to my YouTube channel. I made a full-length documentary on 7/7. There's tons of discussions with Tom Secker about terrorism and various things, and then quite a few decent vlogs and things on there. So, yeah, just go to the site and you'll be able to click through and then find all sorts of different things.
Sure, and how can people follow you on Twitter?
My Twitter is altnewsuk.
Excellent. And, I highly encourage the listeners to go and check out, wideshut.co.uk. Lots of great articles. You said the Boston bombing stuff. And, you did an excellent, documentary fairly recently on, the 7/7 and lots of great stuff with Tom Secker. So a ton to, discover there. So Keelan, thank you so much for joining us on the show. I'd love to get you back on soon. Maybe we can wrangle Tom and the three of us can either talk about this or some other stuff, because it's been tremendous. And as I said, I've admired you from afar for a while, so it's great to finally have you on the show. Just briefly, before I go, I just also want to mention that I will be having Pat McKenna back on the show with tremendous response on the last episode that I did with Pat all about the O.J. Simpson trial. So we're going to have Pat back on the show very soon. And send me any questions or things that you'd like Pat and I to discuss. I know that I've already gotten quite a few people who have sent in questions, so we're going to answer all of those hopefully in the next episode, and hopefully we'll have Pat back on either next Tuesday or the Tuesday after that. We just have some scheduling stuff there. So lots of good stuff on the horizon. And here we are, we're at the end of the radio show, Keelan, and we still have time to kill. So, anything you want to leave the listeners with?
Just, keep questioning, keep looking into things a bit more deeply than, the media tells you to. When you get events like this, the truth is often buried very, very, very deeply in all this stuff. So, take the time to look into it.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you again, Keelan, for joining me on the show. Thank you all for listening, and I will be talking to you very soon.
news and information you can trust. This is American Freedom Radio. Freedom, American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
And I hope people support American Freedom Radio. And I hope people vote with their dollars and really understand the value of having American Freedom Radio. Because that's my family. If you love me at all, Jack Blood, support American Freedom Radio. Like, my family has literally disowned me. American Freedom Radio, Danny and Don and those guys, those are my actual family. So please support these guys, because they have all the technology, they have all these great things that they're going to do, but obviously they can't do it all by themselves. So not only would I like to see you support them, I'd like to see you retweet them and repost them and really get involved and get on the bandwagon, so to speak, on doing that do-it-yourself promotion, because they're a do-it-yourself radio network, and we just need that so much.
Nutritious food is real body armor. It builds muscle, burns fat, improves digestion, and feeds the entire body the nutrients it needs. Did you know the U.S. government banned the hemp plant from growing in the United States and classified it as a Schedule I drug to hide it behind the marijuana plant? People have been confused about this plant for over 80 years, and many still don't know what hemp is. So now you know hemp is not marijuana, and marijuana is not hemp. They are different varieties of the same species. HempUSA.org wants the world to know these basic facts and to help people understand that hemp protein powder is the best kept health secret you need to know about. Remember, hemp protein powder contains 53% protein, is gluten-free, anti-inflammatory, non-GMO, and is loaded with nutrients. Call 888-910-4367, 888-910-4367, and see what our powder, seeds, and oil can do for you. Only at HempUSA.org.
This is Rick Simpson, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.